Stray dog refuses to let officer by until one day he follows him and sees why. Out of nowhere, he stopped the car suddenly as the black dog came out of nowhere, stark against the white snow. It ran in front of his car and refused to move. He leaned on the horn before taking stock of the situation. And then strangest feeling came over him as he looked into the dog's eyes. His instincts told him that he was trying to tell him something. Empty streets. On the cold February morning of February 15th, 2015, Officer Jeff Gonzalez was patrolling the quiet neighborhood of Autumn Ridge, Wisconsin, when he was stopped in his tracks by the strangest sight. The snow had collected in huge drifts all around him, and the roads were eerily quiet. But he soon realized that he wasn't alone. Situation unfolding. The dog ran alongside him for a while, and although Jeff was concerned for the dog running in the street, the situation only took a sinister turn when he realized that the black Labrador appeared to be looking for someone. The wind outside was bitterly cold, and it was no place for anyone, animal or human, to be out in. That's when Officer Gonzalez decided to investigate. Strange behavior. Officer Gonzalez had a feeling in the pit of his stomach that there was more to the dog running in the road. When he drove a little closer, he saw that its movements were odd. It would run up the road for a few feet, barking frantically, and then stop and look around before running back down again. Cautious approach. He got out of his squad car and approached the dog cautiously. Although his training had prepared him for any situation, nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. His boots crunched in the snow as he approached from behind, and suddenly the dog turned. He was able to catch the flash of a metal name tag on his collar, but before he could grab it, the dog was off again. Following him. Getting back in his squad car, Officer Gonzalez decided to try a different tactic. He wound his window down and drove alongside the dog as it sprinted back up the road. Suddenly, the dog noticed that he was being followed and stopped dead. He raised his head to look at the officer and stood absolutely still, tail wagging. Taking off. Thinking that his plan had worked, Gonzalez opened the door carefully and tried to approach the dog again. But the same thing happened. As soon as his boots hit the ground, the dog took off running in the opposite direction. Gonzalez had no hope of catching him on foot, so he got back in the car and drove after him. But this dog was not going to be caught so easily. Protect and serve. Officer Gonzalez had sworn to protect and serve the community of Germantown, and to him that included its four-legged inhabitants. But what he didn't know was that the black Labrador alone in the snow that day wasn't the one who needed saving. If only he'd listened to his instincts sooner. If only he could have known what the frantic dog had been trying to tell him. Gone. As he crested the rise, he noticed that he couldn't see the dog, but where it had gone. His eyes moved from one side of the snow-covered pavement to the other, but the black dog was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, he saw its outline in his headlights as he slammed on the brakes and swerved, trying to tell him something. His wheels screeched and shuddered on the icy road before coming to a halt, but the dog still hadn't moved. It was sitting in the middle of the road now, motionless. It was an eerie sight. A lonely black dog sitting silently in his headlights as the snow fell gently all around it. Officer Gonzalez, shaken, paused for a second as the dog raised his head and looked directly into his eyes. They shared a strange, silent moment, and then he knew. Beckoning. As if understanding that the man finally understood what he wanted, the dog started to walk again, looking back over his shoulder every few paces, beckoning Officer Gonzalez to follow with his amber eyes. Gonzalez drove behind the dog until they rounded the bend into a driveway in County Line Road, where he was met with a sight that turned his blood to ice in his veins. A body. From a distance, Officer Gonzalez could make out somebody sitting on the porch, but there was something off about the way the body was slumped over, motionless. He wasted no time wondering what had happened and rushed over, fearing the worst. He touched the woman's skin and it was icy cold. Was he too late? Calling backup. The woman's lips were blue, and she'd been out in the cold for a while. Gonzalez pulled her collar aside and searched for a pulse, but found none. Then he felt a small quiver beneath the woman's skin. Faint, but it was there, the weakest of pulses. Realizing that the woman was still alive, he dashed back to his squad car and radioed for help, all too aware that time was running out. Crystal went. Backup arrived shortly afterward, and Officer Gonzalez was able to move the freezing woman into the house. They managed to find identification and discover that the woman's name was Crystal Went. While they waited for the ambulance to arrive, they knew they had to call her next of kin, Tian. It was a call they wished they didn't have to make. Dreaded call. Tian picked up the phone and was startled to hear an officer on the line. Gonzalez quickly explained that her mother was in critical condition, but help was on the way. When Gonzalez explained that he had initially thought he was too late, she was so overcome with tears that she broke down, but agreed to get to the hospital as soon as she could. Waiting game. She arrived at the hospital where Chris had been taken with her stricken aunt in tow, but they could only wait to hear about their beloved mother and sister. The minutes ticked by as they waited for Crystal's prognosis, but it seemed like an eternity had passed before the doctor finally appeared. The first thing the doctor told them was that, thankfully, she'd been saved just in time. Just in time. The doctor also went on to say that Crystal had fallen unconscious because of a heart condition that she never knew she had. Her doctor determined that she'd been unconscious for nearly an hour before Officer Gonzalez had found her, just in time. He said that she may never have recovered if he hadn't seen her, but Officer Gonzalez has to give credit where it's due. Good boy. I gotta believe that at this point, Officer Gonzalez said, he pointed me in the right direction. The mysterious black Labrador's name is John Boy, and without his help, Crystal might not have made it. He clearly loves his owner very much and somehow knew that he had to go and fetch help, from a police officer no less. But John Boy didn't always have Crystal in his life. Meant to be. John Boy had been adopted by Crystal after his 3 previous homes had fallen through. He had been adopted and returned to the shelter 3 times before the pair found each other. He's very protective of my mom, said Tian Went. She believed beyond a doubt that John Boy was meant to be with her mother for a reason, and now he'd proven it. Reunion. When the incredible story aired on national television, Crystal was in stable condition while she remained in the hospital, recovering and undergoing more tests. But Tian had a message from her mother for Officer Gonzalez. She met him and immediately hugged the officer with tears in her eyes. She knew that if it weren't for the officer's actions that day, her mother may not be around to tell the tale. And if it weren't for the loyal canine, John Boy, Gonzalez may never have found her.